Hello everyone, welcome back to a new video. In this video, I will be doing a guide on the sealed format that Riftbound League of Legends trading card game offers. Keep in mind that we are going under the assumptions that you already know the basic rules of the regular format. If you need a recap on that, feel free to check out my comprehensive beginner's guide link in the description below. I hope you enjoy. So what exactly is a sealed format? In this case, we'll be opening 6 booster packs from the booster box, and we're going to be constructing a deck, and then using that constructed deck, we will be playing. So this format really tests your deck building skills and your adaptability to work with a variety of cards, as well as tests your luck a bit, and if you get any really good cards from the booster packs. Anyhow, let's get into our sealed format. Let's look at the main deck first right here. So cards in the main deck have a blue backing again. Remember, if you do use a chosen champion, it is part of your main deck. More on that a bit later. You are not limited to 3 copies of a single card, unlike the regular format. So if you decide, and if you do receive 4 Masks of Foresight, you could just add all 4 of them in towards your main deck right here. Additionally, if you have 5, 6, 7, or even more of that, you can add all of them, as long as you do get them in your booster packs. For your main deck, it must consist of exactly 25 cards that match your domain identity. So again, a little recap on domains. They are the colors that your deck is going to be composed of, and you can select 3 out of the current 6 to play with. So we can take a quick overview of the domains right here. So we have Fury, Body, Mind, Chaos, Order, and Calm. I have listed the playstyles in brief right here alongside their weaknesses. You can take a pause of this video if you want to take a deeper read into this. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next item, which is going to be our legend right here. So we do not need a legend in sealed format because you can be pretty unlucky in your booster packs and not get a legend at all, because legends are generally higher rarity. To be exact, they are rare, which is a step above uncommon. So legends will come from the packs that you open. If you choose to use a legend, its domain identities must be present in your domain choices. So if you do decide to choose Lee Sin right here, it is green and orange, so 2 out of your 3 domains have to be green and orange, so orange and green, and then your third one, if you do choose to use a third one, can be any other color. Let's move on. So you can choose to only use 2 domains, so if I'm still sticking with Lee Sin, I don't need to use that third domain of any color. I can just stick with orange and green for more consistency if you so desire. Additionally, I can only also just run one that matches my legend if I do have a legend, for even more consistency, though I do not recommend only running one color, because it limits your possibility of deck building a lot. Okay, let's go over some examples now. So in our main deck, we decide to choose our Lee Sin Legend, and our domain color choices are yellow, orange, and green. Orange and green are mandatory if we do decide to use Lee Sin right here because of orange and green again. So some things that are good, so cards we can use are green, orange, and yellow cards, no matter if it's a unit, spell, or gear. And then things we can't put in are colors that are not green, orange, or yellow, so red, blue, or purple we cannot. I think that is pretty self-explanatory. Okay, moving forward to our chosen champion right here. Let's take a look. So your chosen champion can be any champion unit that matches your domains, so yellow, orange, or green. You do not need to have a chosen champion. It does not need to match your legend's name, so normally in regular format, your chosen champion has to match your legend's name of Lee Sin, so you can only have Lee Sin chosen champions. And also, you do not need to have a legend to have a chosen champion. Let's take a look at an example right here. So right here we have Caitlyn. It is green. It is green. We do have a green domain right here, so it checks out that criteria. Secondly, it checks out the criteria that it is a champion unit, so we can decide to use Caitlyn as our chosen champion, even though it is not named Lee Sin. Let's take a look at some other examples. So right here, again, of course, we can keep using our Lee Sin right here. It is green, it is a champion unit. We can also use orange. Kiana, it is a champion unit. We have orange in our domain identity. Or Fiora, it is a champion unit, and it is yellow, which is part of our domain identity right here that we've chosen. Next, let's take a look at signature spells. So you do not have to play any signature spells. If you choose to, the signature spells must fully match your domain colors. you can have multiple signature spells that fulfill the criteria, and again, signature spells do not have to match your legends. You are not limited to only playing Lee Sin's signature spell. So let's take a look at some examples. Of course, you can play Dragon's Rage right here. It is Lee Sin's signature spell. It is orange and green, which matches our orange and green domains. We can also play Zenith Blade right here. It is green and yellow, which we have green and yellow. We can use it. We can also use Showstopper right here. It is orange and yellow. We have orange and yellow. So from these, we can use. Let's look at ones where we cannot use them. So we cannot use Super Mega Death Rocket. It is red and purple. We do not have red nor purple, so we can't use it. There's also Siphon Power right here. It is blue and yellow, although we do have yellow. We do not have blue, so we can't use it. And then Last Breath, we have green, but not purple, so we cannot use Last Breath. Okay, let's take a look what would happen if we do not have a chosen champion or a legend. Remember, this is a legend, and this is a chosen champion, so any champion unit that matches your domain. So again, you can elect not to play a legend or a chosen champion. If you do not play a legend or a chosen champion, at the start of your first beginning phase, you will draw an additional card. So you should have 6 cards in your initial hand in total. So the 4 cards initially that you draw that you can mulligan, your first draw, and then your additional draw. So 4 plus 1 is 6. Next, if you do not play a legend and you do not play a chosen champion, you will still only draw an additional card at the start of your first beginning phase. So you do not draw 2 additional cards if you do not have a legend and a chosen champion. So you'll still only have 6 in your initial hand. So it is sometimes good to not use a legend or a chosen champion as a strategic decision if you don't have a suitable legend or you don't have a good champion unit that you don't need readily accessible, and hence you can just get that extra card draw at the beginning. That may help you in the game later on. Now let's take a look at the runes. Bloop, 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 bloop. Okay, so our rune deck consists of 12 rune cards. They have the white backing. There should be an infinite pile of runes that you can build your rune deck with, so you are not limited to the runes you get from opening packs, because you'll only get a maximum of 6 from opening packs. So your chosen runes must be part of your domain identity, so if we are using our Lee Sin with yellow, we can only include yellow, orange, and or green runes in this case. You may choose not to include a rune color that is part of your domain identity. For example, you can choose not to include orange runes even though you have orange cards in your deck. So in this case, where it's relevant is potentially where you have in your yellow a huge pool of cards that require a lot of yellow power, so you want the ratio to be more heavily leaning towards the yellow side. But for your orange cards, you do not have any orange cards that require an orange power at all, so you can just not use the orange rune and get the split more towards the yellow and green favored. However, you do need to be a bit careful for sneaky cards that don't explicitly say that you need a certain rune color. So of course we have Kraken Hunter, it obviously says you need orange power right here, though you can spend buffs to reduce the power cost right here, it is very inconsistent. Something less obvious is Lee Sin right here. It does have an accelerate option, so you can choose to accelerate it, but if you don't have any orange power, you cannot accelerate Lee Sin at all, which removes its element of potential surprise. Secondly, Mistfall again also doesn't explicitly say that it needs orange power, but in its text, if you read it a bit more, it says when you buff a friendly unit, you may pay an orange power and exhaust it to ready it. So if you don't have an accessible way of receiving orange power at all, then this card is essentially useless. And then just make sure for seals to remember that seals do generate your power, but they themselves require a power cost to be played. So don't think that you can just use a seal without using an orange power. Okay, moving on, let's take a look at the battlefields. So for battlefields, you must have 3 battlefields for you to play a best of 3. If you do not have enough battlefields, you must use a blank battlefield. Blank battlefields are just like neutral battlefields that have no effects. You may choose to use blank battlefields even if you receive named battlefields from your packs. So for example, even if you receive 4 battlefields from your packs right here, you can elect to use a blank battlefield rather than the ones from the packs. So you can mix and match blank and quote-unquote named battlefields that you received for your pack. Blank battlefields are represented by a face-down card. If you receive 2 of the same battlefield, you may put them in your battlefield pile. So this means if I receive Obelisk of Power, Candlelit, and Targon Speak, and I want to use 2 Obelisk of Power, I can put it in the battlefield pool that I use and just take out Targon Speak. So I can just elect to use these 3, or these 3 and a mixture of blank battlefields, just summing to 3. Just make sure that when you are playing a set throughout the games, you do swap between the battlefields. So you can't use the specific battlefield, like you can't use this one specifically twice, but you can use this one once and then this Obelisk of Power for the second game. Okay, moving on. So in some events, there may be a sideboard. So a sideboard is basically switching up the cards in your main deck and your other parts of the deck to help you in a particular matchup between games. So a limited deck sideboard is every card provided to the player as part of a competition that isn't used in deck construction. So I'm still unsure of some particular sideboard rules. It's not officially clear in the tournament rules that's posted, but I'll update it in the comments below. So my questions are, can you sideboard more than 8 cards? Because the normal sideboard in a regular match is limited to 8. Can you sideboard runes by changing the ratios? How about just switching to a completely new domain? And can you sideboard legends? If anyone is working at Riot wants to let me know, that will be greatly appreciated. Aside from that, let's take a look at how to build a proper limited deck. So of course, you'll be seeing a lot more commons and uncommons. So this is a symbol for common, this is for uncommon, this is for rare, and this is for epic. And of course, there is another rarity over that that's overnumbered, but that is insanely rare to find. And overnumbered cards are basically reskins of some variation of these cards below. Let's take a look at the rates right here. So when opening one pack, there are 7 common slots, 3 uncommon slots, 2 rare or better slots. So it can be a rare, an epic, or a potential overnumbered. 1 foil slot, that is most likely common or uncommon, but can also be other rarities. There is 1 token or rune slot, which is irrelevant in this format since you are supplied an unlimited number of runes and tokens to build your deck with. Again, tokens are on the side. This totals to 14 in a pack. So if you are opening 6 packs with total relevant cards being 13, subtracting the token and rune slot, we have 6 times 13, which is 78 cards to build a 25 card deck with. To elaborate a bit further, here are the exact percentages for a pack that is calculated by Clark from the official Riftbound community Discord. So knowing that there are a lot of commons and uncommons within our packs, let's take a deeper look in towards the commons and uncommons for each color. We'll be skipping over the rare cards because you won't necessarily get the ones you want most of the time. So in the next couple of slides, I'll be showing some of the common and uncommon cards just directly from the Origins packs, not including Proving Grounds, and I will highlight the top 5 aura cards and maybe talk about some other cards that are potentially pretty good in sealed format, unlike in the regular format. So let's jump into that. So first right here we have yellow. Again, it's good for unit spam, it complements a good unit sacrifice for better effects, and it has a lot of kill effects for bigger units. The cream of the crop is probably Hidden Blade because it's so versatile, able to kill specific target priority units, or as well as just to draw some cards on your own. There are also the staples present, good really solid 2-drops and 3-drops, so Daring Poro, Trifarian Glory Seeker, Noxian Drummer, and Vanguard Captain. The Legion effect is relatively easy to trigger, and if you have Vanguard Captain, it pairs well with Spectral Matron. Scout, Faithful Manufacturer, Cruel Patron are also decent cards. There is also Petty Officer, which is not as used in the normal format, but in this format it is a decent card. Back-to-back Call to Glory are decent spells. There's also Facebreaker right here, and it helps push back attacking big units that are attacking in solo. There's also Call to Weak and Cruel Patron. They're both decent if you do have enough unit spam. Moving on to the next color, there is purple. So purple in general, I'd say, have more of the weaker units overall. It has decent movement on and off battlefields. You can push opposing units off, or you can move around on your own. However, I think this purple is more used towards a side domain that combos with the rest of your deck rather than a standalone domain. So a good staple is probably Gust. It's very versatile, can save your own units, can push units off battlefields, can give you the point advantage even if you're going second, so you can Gust their first unit trying to come in. Other cards that are pretty decent, I'd say, is Ride the Wind. It is good combo potential. Otherwise, there's the staple 2-drops, Traveling Merchant and Mystic Poro, as well as Fight or Flight is a decent card. I wouldn't recommend the gears, treasure troves, siren, and pack of wonders usually, unless it has a good combo potential that you are going for. For large unit removal, there is fading memories and rebuke. There is also rebuke in unit form from Zono Bouncer right here. Surprisingly, Stealthy Pursuer and Undercover Agent are all pretty decent pickups that aren't as popular in the regular format. Stealthy allows you to swing bigger towards a battlefield, and Undercover Agent does help you cycle a bit in towards your deck. And potentially when you are low on cards, you don't have anything to discard, then you can just draw two. Okay, moving on, we have the orange color now. I'd say orange in general likes to play more towards the top end of heavy units, so a bit more scaling in general, so it is slower in the early game, but you can match it with other colors to complement its weaknesses. It has good potential buffs and ready interactions, and then I guess its weakness is it lacks meaningful spell interaction besides the challenge right here. The other two, Flurry of Blades and Cannon Barrage, aren't nearly as good. I'd say the staple cream of the crop is probably Pit Rookie and First Mate. Pit Rookie is just a very good 2-drop. You can play it raw or play it after you have units on board to give them a buff, and potentially that buff will help certain breakpoints. First Mate is also decent, so you can always ready another unit, potentially surprising a big unit on board, giving it a pseudo accelerate in that case. The Confront is actually pretty good as well, acts like a first mate, but also helps you cycle by drawing one. Challenge is always good, but keep in mind the might of your units in sealed is generally lower than in regular format, so you might not be able to swing very heavy, but that also applies to your opponent not having as much might in general as well. Crack Shot is actually pretty decent as well. When buffed, it itself can take out a 5 might unit. For the top end right here, all of these top end cards are generally decent as well. The Mountain Drake is actually pretty hard for people to remove if they are not yellow or have any kill spells. Bilgewater Bully is decent. It's 6 might for just 6 energy with no power cost, and if it's buffed, it also has ganking. Stormclaw Ursine gives you a bit of ramp. However, I'd say generally in most decks, you will not need to pay as many power costs as in the regular format, so you will get enough runes and scale up over time. And the reason behind this is because most of the common cards and uncommon cards usually do not require power costs, or not as much power costs, if at all. This also means that Catalyst of Aeons and Mobilize are not as great unless you're playing a full heavy scaling build. Moving on to the gear, Arena Bar is pretty decent, you get a buff. Pirate's Haven is also decent, so whenever you ready a friendly unit, you get +1 might, so this also occurs from the Awakening phase at the beginning of your turn. Cub is also decent, but usually the opponent in sealed format does not have as many damaging spells, so hiding it is not as valuable as in regular format. Let's move on to the next color right here. So in my opinion, I think blue is probably the best color in this format. It has good heavy removal, it has built-in card draw, and generally is a really good color. So a cream of the crop is probably Riptide Rex. It gives you a pretty beefy unit, as well as it has very good removal. It does 6 damage to an enemy unit on a battlefield. Similarly, Singularity is really good to poke out priority targets that are hiding in base, or just big units in general. We next have Consult the Past, which is a very consistent card draw for just a power in general if you hold a battlefield and hide it. Next, there's Sprite Mother, gives you a Sprite token that's ready, allows you to push battlefields. Generally, again, units are weaker in this format overall because there's less synergy and stuff, so that Sprite can usually get a point by itself. There's also Stupefy, which helps you with certain breakpoints, as well as just helps you cycle drawing a card. The 2-drops in this color are really good. So Blastcone Fae is decent, Ravenbloom is good, Watchful Sentry is good, Eager Apprentice is decent, Lecturing Mortal is good. I'd say the worst low drop card is probably Gemcraft Seer, since you won't need to cycle and look at cards very often. For the other spells, Retreat is pretty decent. Smokescreen is pretty good, get a unit -4 might, potentially giving you breakpoints or helping you defend or conquer a battlefield. Falling Comet is decent removal. For the gear, Orb of Regret is okay-ish. Probably you don't want to include a lot of copies of it, since it can only be used on your turn since it's base speed. Otherwise, Mushroom Crouch is probably not recommended. Garbage Grabber is also probably not recommended since you have a lot of innate card draw, but if you are getting into a deck that has a very heavy draw and cycle playstyle, and you don't want to deck out giving your opponent a point, then Garbage Grabber is pretty decent because you can recycle 3 from your trash, putting your cards back towards the main deck. As for the heavier end, Jeweled Colossus is pretty good. It does have shield and it has vision. Mega Mech is pretty decent for 7 energy, gives you an 8 might unit, gives the opponent a really hard time to remove it, and the opponent probably needs multiple attackers, and it usually can't just be killed with spells that don't have kill effects. Sprite Skull is also a really good reactionary hidden card, as well as it can also be played in showdowns as well to a battlefield you control, helping you defend. It can also be used offensively, kind of just like a sprite from Sprite Smother. Moving on to the next color right here, we have red. So red has a lot of damage spells, but some of them are locked behind rarity. So for example, we don't have Falling Star, probably the best red card that does damage. Secondly, there are a lot of hard-hitting units that conquer or rarity really quickly that are locked by rarities such as Vayne, Draven, or Darius that are usually staples. Just keep that in mind. But otherwise, red still has some pretty good cards. Discards are pretty stunted right here, and in this format, I'd say you probably don't want to discard a lot of cards because you will have the possibility of decking out. So your deck is only 25 cards, so if you keep cycling, and discarding, drawing, then you will potentially run out of cards if you don't have a way to recycle them back into your main deck. Red is a pretty good pairing color if you do have some higher rarity cards in red, or just to pair if you have a lot of damaging spells from red. I'd say the prime card is Void Seeker, does 4 damage, gives you a draw, as well as Noxus Hopeful. Essentially, most of the time, a 2 cost 4 might, so a really just good early game unit on board. Otherwise, there's also Cleave, which has a good +3 when attacking, gets over a lot of those break points and surprises the opponent. There's also Dangerous Duo with the same principle as with Cleave, but also gives you a unit instead. Blazing Scorcher is just a decent unit that has potentially Accelerate if you need to play him in Surprise. For the 2-drops, of course, there's Pouty Poro, Legion Rearguard are all decent. The Chemtech, it has a discard effects, so unless you do see yourself drawing a bunch of cards, Chemtech is probably not recommended since you do want to keep your hand size pretty healthy. I treat the 3-drops right here, Noxus Autor and Flame Chompers, basically as vanilla 3-drops, potentially because it's hard to discard Flame Chompers, and it really depends if your opponent is playing any hidden cards at all, and if they do see you have this card right here, they might instead just keep it in hand rather than hiding it. For other damage spells, Hextech Ray is a pretty good option. Get excited again if you don't have many cards to discard, and if you don't have a lot of top end high energy cards, it's not as great, but otherwise it's decent. There's also Disintegrate, which is less used in the regular format, but in this format it's still a decent card. If you do have higher might units, Sky Splitter is a decent pickup as well. For the top end or middle end of the units, Raging Soul is okay, but you probably won't be able to get the discard effect. Most of the time, there is Captain Farron, which is pretty decent. It gives you a pretty solid might on board, and if you're playing anything with unit spam, especially with yellow, then you can get a pretty big push out of it. Scrapyard is okay for cycling and potential draw. Brazen Buccaneer is also decent, so if you don't want to discard, you can just pay its full cost instead, and Magma Worm is a pretty good top-end card. For the gear aspect, you probably don't want Thermo Beam. It's pretty costly, and it is unreliable that your opponent will be using gears. You don't know that. Iron Ballista isn't as fast as it seems because it enters exhausted, and it really depends if your opponent is running more of a spam type of deck or towards a heavy end. Similarly, with Sundisk and Unlicensed Armory, you just need to look at your deck to see if these cards fit with your deck. Lastly, we have green right here. Green is the color for plenty of reaction spells and decent negation. It is good on defense, but however, I think its main weakness is it lacks damage and kill spells, and it relies mainly on holding or buffing units through the use of spells to push them onto a battlefield. I'd say the cream of the crop for green is Charm. It's pretty versatile, allows you to use it offensively or just to kill priority targets by dragging them towards a battlefield. Discipline is also really good, gives you a card draw while giving +2 as a reaction. Of course, there is the partner on guard. However, in some cases, you might not be playing only a single unit on a battlefield, so in that case, only give +1, so keep that in mind. Defy is just generally good because most of the time your opponents will be playing at least some spells, so you do want to have a chance to negate it if possible. Looking at the early game units, Stalwart Poro is a good pickup. Clockwork Keeper is also good because for a potential card draw if you do need it. Wielder of Water is decent. Sunlit Guardian is actually pretty good. It has both tank and shield, so it is pretty hard to remove for its low cost. And if it has a buff, or if you're defending alone, it becomes really hard to deal with. And of course, because of tank, your opponent has to target it first. Similarly, Wizened Elder is really hard to remove if it has a buff. It's basically a 6 might with a buff. Solari Shieldbreaker is not as great that I thought it'd be. It is still very situational when you want to stun a unit. Similarly with Portal Herder, it's pretty situational. Adaptatron is still pretty bad because the key gear Dazzling Aurora is not a common or uncommon, so it's pretty rare to see. Eclipse Herald is just okay. You can just play it as a top end vanilla card and just kind of ignore its effect because it is pretty hard to trigger without Solari Shieldbreaker, Rune Prison, or other stun effects. On the topic of spells, Rune Prison block is pretty decent on defense. Stand United is a bit more situational, but it could be a good pairing potentially with Orange where you have more buffs and you are going wide in general. For card draw, Meditation is pretty solid. There's also Find Your Center, which is a pretty decent pickup for a cycling and ramping and potentially catching up. Windwall, although costly, it is pretty good still for just a negation towards any type of spell. If you are playing a more heavier top end, Reinforce is a decent pickup to get the priority heavy end cards you want later on. On the topic of gears, Spirit's Refuge is pretty decent. Mask of Foresight it's okay, I'd say. Giving you the +1 again can push you out of certain breakpoints. Anyhow, that will be it for the commons and commons. Although I will not be speaking about much of the rares, I do want to do a little dabble towards the legends, as they are a pretty crucial part of a deck, and choosing between including one or not including one can change the outcome of the game. So let us get started. So this is the preliminary testing tier list that I have postulated so far. I haven't tested all the legends in sealed format, but any changes, I'll probably add them to the pinned comment below. Okay, so this is the beginning from tier. So if you have set and you don't have any buffs, so this is conditional that you don't have a way of buffing anything, this legend is essentially useless. Next, we have Teemo right here. The only advantage it gives you is it allows you to hide a card with an energy instead of a power cost. The card specifies that it can only return Teemos back to hand, so it is pretty useless. You can't really return any other chosen champions back to your hand. And of course, both Teemos that are present are in the rare category, so it is unlikely that you'll get a Teemo at all alongside a Teemo legend. Moving on, we have Leona. So Leona is conditional with a stun that will give your units a buff. It is pretty hard to get stuns in this because usually the main way of Leona getting stuns is through the Leona Yellow Leona champion unit, which is pretty rare in this format. So you will only need to rely on the common and uncommon stuns, which are the Shieldbreaker and the Rune Prison. At that point, you potentially just want maybe a extra card at the beginning of your phase rather than a potential buff. Moving on, there is Volley Bear. So it ramps a rune when you play a mighty unit that is 5 or more might. However, generally in this format, I do find that you have less of an issue scaling up your runes than in the regular format, since a lot of the common and uncommon cards, again, don't require as much power as the other more stable cards in actual regular format with constructed decks. Moving on to the fine category, we have Kai'Sa right here. Again, for that reason, where power is not as important. It is still important, but Kai'Sa can only be used for spells, and some spells are locked behind rarities such as Falling Star. Take note that this Kai'Sa legend can pay for deflect costs when you do cast a spell as well. But otherwise, unless you're playing a very spell heavy deck that does require a lot of power cost, Kai'Sa is not the greatest. You potentially just want the extra card instead. Moving on, we have Jinx right here. So if you're low on cards, you get to draw an extra card, and this is not as great as it seems, although you do cycle through your deck. Again, your deck is smaller, so you might burn out. So due to this, it's much better to keep more cards in your hand for a versatile playstyle rather than cycling through your deck to try and fish for the cards you want. Secondly, a lot of the cards that give you card draw are in the common and uncommon range, so you can easily get cards from there rather than through your legend instead. Next is Darius, which allows you another energy if you trigger its Legion effect. Potentially, that energy is crucial in helping you secure a good early victory to snowball the game around, but this is dependent on the type of cards you do include. Since again, this isn't a constructed format, you won't be able to get the very good starting combos that the normal Darius usually has in the regular format. So it really depends on what cards you put in and what cards you draw. Next, we have Ari right here. Ari itself is okay. The -1 might when defending is decent. However, the main point where it's good is Ari is blue-green. So blue is a really good color, green is a good color, and then you just need to pair on a more heavy end or some other color to complement the Ari, and you'll do pretty well. From my experience, because of how this format is formatted, where there are generally less units, because you do want to fit some good spells. In general, there are less units that are attacking, so most of the time it's only 1 or 2 that are attacking a battlefield, so the -1 gets less value in that regard, but otherwise it's still a decent effect. Misfortune is up next, so we do get a free ganking from Misfortune, and Misfortune generally does like to benefit from a more heavy end. However, Misfortune is purple, which has less of a heavy end, so you do need to rely on your orange end to see if you do get those cards. But a free ganking is always just decent in general. Next we have Yasuo with 2 energy. You basically get an accelerate, or you can pull a unit back to retreat. This either allows you to score some early points or allows you to pseudo accelerate some heavy units in the late game. Keep in mind that there are less when I attack effects compared to the regular Yasuo, and you do need to find a way to fit green and purple within this alongside with another color. And the fact that green is more focused on holding in general, it is not as effective with the 2 energy trying to poke and play. Okay, moving on to the strong tier. We have Lee Sin for 1 energy and tapping. You get a buff on a unit. It really helps trigger the cards that do really well with buffs. And most of the green cards that are common and uncommon really benefit from a buff. Orange as well as too. If you have excess energy to use, you can always use it on the buff. Otherwise, you can just elect not to use it. So that versatility is also pretty good there. Lastly, to add on to Lee Sin, if you are going second and you have a 2-drop and you buff the 2-drop, your 2-drop is able to potentially take out your opponent's 2-drop that is likely to might versus your 3. Next, we have Set right here. So with buffs, with a stable source of buffs, unlike the Set in the air category here, it is always a good legend to save a unit. And again, since the power costs are a bit lower in this format, I'd say, you won't be deramped as hard as in regular Set. Lastly, we have Victor right here. It is blue-yellow, pairs really well with the yellow kill effects and sacrifice effects, unlocking Cruel Patreon, as well as Call of the Week. Next, it also, again, kind of like Lee Sin, is pretty versatile and you're able to generate a token whenever you choose to, if you have excess energy or not. That token itself, if you are going second alongside a 2-drop, does allow you to take potentially 2 battlefields, giving you the point advantage. While these are all the original ones, there are some people that want to potentially play with the Proving Grounds ones if you are playing on Tabletop Simulator that generates packs. So my listing of those ones right here are as such. Master Yi is just pretty strong. The effect is pretty good because if your opponent is not red and doesn't have a lot of damage spells, essentially you'll have a very big unit on board really early, really quick. Annie is pretty decent, so if you pair this with green, it gives you a good interaction window to do stuff. It is essentially a free Targon's Peak every turn. And then in the category, there is Lux, so it is conditional on you playing 5 cost or more spells, where there is in yellow and blue. However, you already have a lot of innate card draw in blue, so you probably don't need more card draw from your legend. Potentially just want a legend more focused on combat if you are using blue in general. And lastly, for Garen, like in the regular format, and suffering even more right here, it is really hard to trigger its legend effect. It is also less consistent for you to get more unit spam in this format as well. Generally, you'll have more standalone units than a bunch of tokens and spam to try to conquer battlefields. And again, like in the regular format, your units do have to survive. So 4 units have to survive after combat for you to trigger its effect. Okay, that wraps up the tier list right here. Again, keep in mind that it is still in a preliminary state and may change in the future. So moving on, we are going to talk about some tips and tricks for deck building in this format. Okay, so first of all, again, when you are looking at the cards you receive, decide if you are going to use a legend, and if so, you need to build your colors around that legend along with a supplementary color. Next, for other colors, you want to choose the colors where you have the strongest cards in, so it gives you more power. Something else to consider is you probably want to choose the color in which you have the most cards for more flexibility. For example, even if you have 2 orange cards that are really good, but in your orange pile you only have 3 orange cards, potentially you need to choose another color where it has a lot of cards so you can include those orange cards in, or in general you might want to just not use orange at all because you only have 3 cards right there and it really limits your deck building. And then I'd say for your third color in general, probably choose the one where it fills your remaining deck needs. So for potential combos or potential kill effects if it's missing that, potential damage spells if you're missing that, potential strong units if you're missing that. So yeah, choose based on what you need that your other 2 colors cannot provide. Okay, moving on. For the battlefields, look at the battlefields and choose ones that benefit you. Be aware that if it benefits you, it might potentially also benefit your opponent. In that case, potentially consider using blank battlefields if you don't want to also give your opponent an edge, and blank battlefields potentially offer more consistency. And also be aware that some battlefields heavily favor going first. So if you're able to go first and take fortified position, you'll probably be able to sit there for a couple more turns before your opponent can actually remove it. And keep in mind, it's the standard dice roll or random way to determine who's going first. For your rune split, you want to build your deck first and then look at all your cards to choose a good rune split. And then consider potentially sometimes not using all 3 colors of your runes for more consistent rune power output. If you are using all 3 rune colors, cards that have multiple power costs may not be able to be played when you do want them in the early to mid game. So keep that in mind. Moving on, make sure in your deck that you have at least a finisher, such as like Grand Stratagem or something, but ideally a more consistent finisher, such as a top end card with high might or high impact. So generally a vanilla 8 might is also a decent card to play in the late game. So in general, just make sure you have some late game alongside your early game. Of course, also don't forget your early game, and potentially you want to use fewer 2-drops in your main deck, and then when playing, try to go second to get those 3-drops on field rather than the 2-drops. This is usually fine in this format because people are more cautious of using select battlefields that allow you to get an advantage from going first and rushing a battlefield with a 2-drop. For the rest of the deck, make sure to have some sort of interaction via spell or card effects. So some form of removal is highly recommended. So most of the time, you may think that you can remove things solely on through combat, but any type of spell interaction is usually just better because you have the versatility as well. Next, be aware that it is a 25 card deck format, so you can hit cards way more consistently compared to the regular format. So an arena bar, a single arena bar, is much easier to hit. And at the same time, inversely, that because it is a 25 card deck, there is a possibility of running out of cards, and in that case, it will give your opponent a point, and it can be the winning point as well. So that would suck. Also, generally, to end off, you will be able to scale up your runes most of the time because, again, most uncommon and common cards don't require as much of a power cost as in the other regular format where you have cards that have significant power costs and keep you at around a certain energy number. I just want to add on that it is much harder to predict hitting cards in this format since there are three domains and you just have multiple different possibilities, and people might include other weaker hitting cards that may not be used in the regular format. So there is a little edge of playing some hidden cards right here. But then again, if you are playing multiple games in a set, then your opponent will gradually get to know what cards you have hidden, especially since you have a thin hand. Anyhow, this wraps up the guide in general. I'll go through an example of opening cards on Tabletop Simulator and just constructing a sample deck. Okay, voiceover C10 here. So what you'll see me do is I will spawn the packs on Tabletop Simulator. Keep in mind there is an Origins, and then there's also Origins plus Proving Grounds. As the packs are spawning, potentially just scry them pretty quickly with a brief glimpse and get an idea of potentially what you might want to build. Then I will group the cards together, and then the next thing I will probably do is split them into their respective piles so I can get a better understanding of what I have to work with. So I'll be splitting the cards by color and domain. I'll also be removing the battlefields, the legends, and the signature spells aside. Keep in mind that if you don't shuffle on Tabletop Simulator, there is a little packet that contains basically most of your rares and epics, so you want to particularly pay attention to that packet right there and try to build off your cards from that packet, giving you a starting point right there alongside with your legend and battlefields. For the tokens and runes, just put them aside. We can spawn the runes later on Tabletop Simulator, and in person there should be a pool of runes. I'll now speed things along so you don't have to watch all the rest of the sorting out. And then I will talk over my process later. Now that we've got everything sorted out with battlefields, legends, signature spells, and our main deck cards right here, we need to decide on our three colors for our sealed deck. Right off the bat, I do see a set right here, and it is a pretty strong legend if we can get it going. We have a Arena Bar and a Pit Rookie to buff our units, so that is a potential option. Though our yellow and orange cards are fewer in number, and the general cards within orange and yellow are generally weaker as well, but we can potentially pair it alongside probably red or blue to make some kind of deck. However, seeing as our pool is higher rarity cards and more cards are concentrated towards blue, red, and green, I think I'm gonna lean towards building some kind of deck with blue, red, or green. The Vayne Chosen Champion is really good, same with Darius as well. Blitzcrank and Caitlyn are also good chosen champion units. So I think I'm going to build a deck that is blue, red, green. So blue for card draw and removal with the shark cannons right here. Red with some accelerate and some more spell removal and a decent small drop units. And then green as just reactions to just stop our opponent when they attempt to challenge us. I'll probably have to negate a legend right here. Yasuo is decent, however, we do have a bunch of accelerate units potentially hidden in our red pile right here. Voiceover C10 back again, so when I am picking out the cards out of my three colors, I want to pick up the cards that I absolutely sure that I want in my deck first, and then when I do need to fill out additional cards for my card quota, then I will start picking the cards that are decent, but not absolutely needs in my deck. So you can see me doing that. For our battlefields right here, we have Dream Tree, which is nice because we are playing green, which allows us to get some card draw. So we do have an On Guard, Discipline, and Block for it. However, this is only potentially 3 card draw, and we do have a lot of card draw built in. There is Fortified Position right here, which is pretty good for us because we do have a lot of damage spells as well as ways to target things at a battlefield, so it isn't as hard for us to remove stuff as, say, through Conquering, so this would be nice. Reaver's Row is pretty decent for our cards that have Assault, kind of like Darius, which is a pseudo assault, and our Captain Farron right here as well. And then Aspirant's Climb, I don't think we need to slow the game too hard since we don't have the very, very late game units. And then Grand Plaza is basically useless for us because we don't have unit spam. We'll generally never be able to use it. Hence, in my opinion, I'll probably be taking Fortified Position alongside Reaver's Row, and then I'm going to also probably be using a blank battlefield as my third battlefield for my neutral battlefield, because that will be good for going second, whereas Reaver's Row and Fortified Position you probably want to go first. This is especially true for Fortified Position, so I'll yoink those, group those up, and then move it on towards my pile. Okay, now let's take a look at our rune split for our main deck cards. We'll group these together, should be 25. And then I'll take a look through the search function to go through all the cards one by one. Looking at the power split right here, we have red power, red power, red power, red power, red power, red power, and then blue power, blue power, more blue power here. However, our only green power is Blitzcrank, and Blitzcrank requires it to be played consistently because it'll return back to hand when you hold. Hence, in this case, I'll probably actually take Blitzcrank out in preference for Reinforce right here to allow me to not use any green runes to make it more consistent for my red and blue powers. Though Blitzcrank is nice, especially on Fortified Position, which we did choose as our battlefield, the inconsistency of needing a lot of green runes for Blitzcrank, as well as needing runes of other colors for my other units, outweigh the benefit of actually having Blitzcrank, hence I swapped in for Reinforce. Now looking at just the blue-red rune split, I think a 6-6 split would be ideal. It is enough probably for the Riptide Rexes and Kai'Sa, while also having sufficient for potentially playing out a Vayne again when it gets returned back to hand. Okay, so specifically in Tabletop Simulator, we need to get our runes. We didn't get any blue or red runes right here, unfortunately, so we do need to spawn them in. However, in an actual person tournaments, there should be a rune pool that is readily accessible. So we do need to get the deck card number for the runes. We can just hop over to Piltover Archive right here. And we need red, so it's Fury. We see OGN 007, so we need to type in the code on TTS. So it's OGN-007-1, import, and it should spawn right here, and we do get a Fury rune right here. Next we need to look for our blue rune right here. Going back, we have our mind. It is OGN 089, so we can go type 089-1, import, and then we get our 2 runes, and then we can start cloning them right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then clone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like so. Next we can just set up everything. We can group these, flip them over, should be 12, and then put it in our rune pile. We can get our main deck right here, and then our 3 battlefields right here as well. The rest of our cards will be in our sideboard, so we can use them if we are playing with sideboards. Then we can yoink our chosen champion here. Probably, ideally, I think it's either Vayne or Darius, so you can have a readily accessible ready unit under specific conditions. And then, of course, we aren't using a legend right here, so we do get an extra draw in our beginning phase. So just a little example right here, we only have a chosen champion right here. When we do our starting procedures, for example, let's say we want to use a just null battlefield, just use a recruit instead, so this will be our null battlefield right here, and then we'll draw our 4 cards. Probably Maul the Kaiser, as well as probably the Rex. Draw our two, and then we'll get our initial draw, as well as our extra draw because we don't have a legend, and that's nice because we do get a 2-drop to start us off. So this is about how it will work for a sealed format. I hope you guys learned a bit and enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. Any feedback will be greatly appreciated, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye bye.